But now I'd like to introduce our last speaker, Dr. Michaela O'Donnell Long, was a former colleague and a friend, is the executive director of the Max De Pree Center for Leadership at Fuller Theological Seminary. The De Pree Center is dedicated to helping leaders respond faithfully to God in all seasons of life and leadership. Michaela's first book, Make Work Matter, Your Guide to Meaningful Work in a Changing World, is due out in October. And I say it can't get here soon enough. I've been waiting for a year or two for this. Well, congratulations anyway, Michaela. We'll be on the lookout for that. Look for it. You can pre-order it now, I guess, too. So Make Work Matter. Denise Yohn, our very own Denise Yohn, is the executive director of the Faith and Work Journey. And our track chair today will be doing an interview with Michaela. And whenever they're done, then we'll pull all the other panelists into into this whole room together, and we'll have a conversation with everybody. So here we go, Michaela and Denise.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Michaela. We are so excited for you to be here with us. And I want to jump right into the topic of the inner journey of transition. And first, let's just talk about, why is this work so critical? What is so critical about the topic of transition?
Well, good to see you again, Denise, and thanks to Susie. And I have absolutely loved listening to Nancy, Bruce, Andrea, and Lisa. I too did not want to leave the dock. I was getting very relaxed in a nice way there. So thank you for that. You know, I even just sort of taking my cue from that, I think it's so hard. Like, we are living in a fast moving, rapidly changing, always surprising world. And you know, a couple of years ago, I used to sit in a room and sort of announce to people, like, hey, the world of work is changing. And people would kind of take a deep breath and sigh and say, oh, you're right. Now I think if I told somebody the world of work is changing, people would be like, yeah, duh, the sky is blue. Like, where have you been? And so dealing with what the implications of that external world do to us is really critical. On top of that, Bruce Feiler, he writes a really cool book, Life in the Transitions. He says that people undergo their own major life transitions every 12 to 18 months. That's a lot. Every 12 to 18 months.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So you take the idea that, you know, it's kind of like the big world is changing, and then my world is changing. And that's why this work, the inner work, the looking, the stuff we've been talking about, that's why it's so critical right now, Denise.
Okay, and so the other half of my question is, why is it so hard? Why are transitions so hard? And maybe specifically, why are they hard for Christ followers?
Oh, good question. Somebody else that I appreciate and read, Ronald Heifetz, he says, you know, really, it's not that people, they don't resist change, they resist loss. And that every time we undergo change, it's some kind of loss, even the good change, right? I think back to when I got married or when I had kids, and those are, I would call those beautiful life transitions, but they came with just this, you know, sort of fracturing of the way life was, and, you know, kind of the need to reorient and recenter. And the fact of the matter is that change work requires grief work. And so it's hard because, I mean, to put it bluntly, grief work's hard. It's painful. It's sad. You got to deal with really negative emotions and things that you'd rather not do. And so that's why it becomes so hard. I take a lot of hope from and cue from our big shared story, faith story. I think about, okay, if we talk about transition, I actually like to think about transitions as little types of death, right? Every time we step out of something, we're coming into new something. And the reason I like to think about it as types of death is because we have a really hopeful way of thinking about death as Christians. You know, death, it's our sort of eternal life, and all that we imagine and hope to step into and are building towards and are participating in now is predicated on death. It's predicated on loss. We cannot get to Easter Sunday without going through Good Friday. And so it feels as though, I would say resilience is actually, and this is sort of taken in some Susie's language, resilience becomes then like a gift of the resurrection. And but that's not that's easier said than done. I just said a lot of nice things about why death should be doable, and why, you know, little things that happen and change should be doable. But that's hard. So believer or not, grief work's hard. No matter what we do, change work is grief work, and we are people that live in constant change.
Thank you for sharing that. And so let's kind of unpeel the onion a little bit on that, and talk about what is that inner work. Because when you talk about transitions being types of death, and the, you know, transition is grief work, like that suggests to me that there is a lot of inner work that needs to happen as you go through transition. So talk to us about what that involves.
Yeah, good question. I'll give one sort of just like biblical imagery, and then I'll talk about how actually I got into this process, because I think that's sort of stumbled my way into this work. I like to call this holy wrestling, and there is none other that is more vivid than Jacob, right? Jacob is going back to meet up with his brother, who he has conflict with, he has fear around, and he sort of sends his folks on ahead of him, and he stays. And in the middle of the night, he wrestles with a stranger. And you know, you can fill commentaries on the book of Genesis about who the stranger is. I'm not going to answer that. I'm not qualified to answer who the stranger is, so I will not try to. But the thing that strikes me is that in the middle of the night, in the dark, right? This is Susie too, right? In the dark, and the bud that ends up coming on the vine, you get an instance that's kind of mysterious, and we know that Jacob, you know, emerges changed with a new name, with sort of this physical aspect of what life looks going forward, and really starts to step into a very different future, and, you know, kind of in God's journey. And so that just knowing that there's wrestling in there, I think, is number one. I'll tell you how I got into this work, and that's kind of what's required. We 2 or 3 years ago, when I did my dissertation, I'm an entrepreneur by trade. I did a dissertation then on entrepreneurs. I just wanted to keep studying them, and out of that dissertation work, developed like a 6-part process. And this process, in my wildest hopes and dreams, was going to teach people to be more entrepreneurial. So I got a bunch of willing participants that didn't know what they were getting themselves into, who came for a beta group at the De Pree Center when I was first working there. And I was excited night one to start teaching people to become more entrepreneurial. And I realized real fast that's not why they were there. They were there because they were dealing with change. They were dealing with transition. And I was like, whoa, this is not what I expected, and honestly not what I signed up for. But here we go. This is the needs of real people sitting in front of me. Are we going to meet the moment, or am I going to walk away? And I decided to lean in, and through that, sort of reiterated and thought about how might we give people a pause? How might we create something where people can do a bit of this work? So we have a 6-step process now, and that's week 1, people come in and they kind of explore what does it mean to be called by God, and what does it mean to be able to narrate my own story through a lens of calling, through my road of calling, if you will. And then the next week is all about what you long for. This is tough stuff. This is getting in touch with the pain stuff. I developed an exercise that, it's actually like design thinking stuff. So we do also sticky notes, and what's helpful about that is people have to go into a different part of their brain. So I'm not saying, Denise, what do you long for? I'm sort of taking you through a series of exercises that something emerges that's quite painful, and the flip side of that is that what you long for. So we do that. And then we move into a series of steps that sort of came up in that original research. And those 4 steps are empathy, imagination, risk-taking, and reflection. And in each of those aren't the only thing people need to do in this transition, but we found it to be a pretty helpful process, and to give people that space. And so, understanding, kind of having that tethering of calling, really getting in touch and being able to name what's causing us pain, what do we long for, and then putting that in dialogue with some practices that help us move towards other people, imagine what is God doing, take next doable risk, and then reflect on that along the way. So that's like the 10,000 foot view of what we do within transition at the De Pree Center.
It sounds fascinating, and I know that we could talk for hours about this, but I want to keep on digging and drilling down a little, because I do want to make this super practical for folks. And so let's talk about the word empathy that you use as one of the 4 tools. It's a word that people use all the time. And so can you talk about, what do you mean by it? How do you cultivate it? What do you do with it?
Yeah, you're right. It's a word. It's one of those words that we use a lot, and it's like, well, what do we mean by that? It could mean 1,000 things. I actually find Daniel Goleman's work really helpful here, and I won't even go all the way into it because it's, he's got multi-categories, but it's in the most basic sense. It's the, I see you, I feel you, and I can move toward you. I'm actually compelled to move toward you. It's been helpful for me to sort of, I'm I'm a practical theologian. I got to find some rooting for this. And I root this, and I root my understanding of empathy actually in the passage of Good Samaritan. So, and actually all 4 of these things. So the Good Samaritan passage that, most of us as Christians know very, very well, right? You've got this guy, this Samaritan, who's going along, on the way from Jerusalem to Jericho, presumably on some Route A to Route B, on a road that's dangerous enough that people are getting mugged and assaulted and, left to the side of the road. So there's certainly some context and some risk. We don't know exactly about this man, but we could potentially make some assumptions from his being a Samaritan. Is he at extra risk? I don't know. What is that like? But he is going along on his donkey, and he sees another man on the side of the road. And this is, of course, after a couple other people who have passed by, people who we might think are obligated even to stop, right? The leaders of the time. And the Samaritan is compelled to move toward, the man in need. So much so that he gets off his donkey, goes and does the oil and gives him his resources, and then puts him on the back of his donkey and has to walk alongside. So now he's going slower on this risky road, enters into, with an innkeeper, some sort of presumably financially risky situation, because he's like, take care of this guy, I'm gonna come back in a couple of days, I'm gonna pay the bill. Who knows? He could have been exploited financially, but he's just moving toward this guy. And so I like to think about empathy as moving toward the others along the way of where you're already going. So we talk about empathy, practicing empathy along the way. And I'll get super practical. I'll kind of describe, and you can kind of do this along if you want as I describe it. What I do is I have people make a list, write it down. You could sort of do it in your head right now, of all the people in your life that you interact with on a daily basis. And add to it all the people that you interact with on a weekly basis. And then add to it all the people that you interact with on a monthly basis. So you've got the people you interact with daily, weekly, monthly. You might be talking about family or coworkers. You might be talking about, other colleagues or whatnot. And then I say to people, okay, now narrow the list down to 3. And oh, by the way, you can put yourself on this list, and then spend some time with it. And who might God be inviting you to move toward over the next 7 days, over the next, 30 days? And people will actually do that. And then they'll start moving towards someone, and some pretty incredible stuff starts to happen when people are moving towards others. So that's a way to move it down and get it very, very practical.
That's so helpful. I so appreciate that. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out more, and I know that you yourself have been on your own kind of leadership transition over the last year, and I would love for you to share about what that's been like and what you've learned.
Yeah, thanks. It all hits the rubber hits the road when it's your own life. I'm in a new job as of 3 months ago. I would call the year before that a year of, like a lot of people, the COVID year. And so it was just a lot of certain things were moving in certain directions, and a lot of hard stops, a lot of pain, honestly, in my own leadership development, a lot of hitting a bunch of brick walls, a lot of forced paying attention, right? As Lisa's talking about, as you know, Ruth Haley Barton's good on that. And honestly, back to even some earlier things we were talking about, a lot of learned humility and just like, okay, like how do I follow God in the waiting? How do I follow God in the waiting? And then as I've made this transition professionally the last 3 months, it's just like, I am a learner. I'm on a very steep learning curve. Anytime we enter into a new position, we're on a very steep learning curve. And, you know, that can be intimidating, I think. But I think that's where like our faith and our stance as Christians allows us to take more of a discipleship stance. And it's like, hey, the goal here is to, you know, be moving and be growing and be learning. And so I'll say there was some hard-earned wisdom over the last year, and now I'm kind of getting to soak in some of the fruit of that, and I'm in on the learning curve in a new way.
Great. Well, I would love for you to tell folks about the stuff that you're working on. Susie mentioned your new book that's coming out, as well as I wanted you to talk about the Road Ahead experience that you developed.
Yeah, so the thing I described is called the Road Ahead. We lead cohort, you know, people through the 6-week experience. Nicole Dickens is part of that. She's one of our Road Ahead guides. Susie's been roped into that in the past, so trusted and vetted. And it's just, you know, if you're in this kind of moment, it actually is a pretty good space. A bunch of those same concepts, I work those out in a book, and that book is coming out this fall. And so it's just kind of, they're kind of one and the same. All of that you can find at depree.org.
Awesome. Well, I wish we had more time together, Michaela, because there's so much, you have so much wisdom and insight and experience. So perhaps as we move into the panel time, if people have questions or want to learn more about some things you said, we can dig into it further. But I'll go ahead and wrap up our interview for now. Thank you so much, Michaela.
Thank you, Denise.
Wow. I think, like you said, we could talk about this for hours. Michaela and I probably have talked about it for hours. I know that's for sure.